Welcome back to CBS This Morning. We have just learned that Texas Republican Ted Cruz is extending his self-quarantine. He says he found out last night that he interacted with a second person who tested positive for the coronavirus. Cruz is the first U.S. senator to begin a coronavirus self-quarantine. He first took the step after interacting with someone who tested positive at last month's conservative political action conference. President Trump and Vice President Pence also attended that conference. Only on CBS This Morning, Senator Cruz joins us by phone from Houston. Good morning, Senator. Thank you for being there.
Good morning. Great to be with you.
To start with, did medical officials recommend you do this, or is this actually just another self-quarantine?
Well, this is another self-quarantine just out of an abundance of caution. The first interaction I had was at CPAC. It was a brief interaction with someone who has since tested positive and is ill. The doctors advised me at the time that given how brief the interaction was and given that 9 days had passed when I was informed of it with no symptoms at all, that self-quarantine wasn't medically necessary, but I decided to do it anyway out of an abundance of caution. That quarantine ended yesterday, and I have to admit I was relieved. I was looking forward to taking my family out to dinner tonight, and then last night I got the news that I had interacted a second individual who was tested positive, a Spanish government official who came to my office in D.C. on March 3rd. I had a meeting in the conference room with him for about 20 minutes. And he apparently tested positive for COVID-19 last night. Given that interaction, I'm consulting with medical authorities as I did the first time, but my intention is simply to extend the self-quarantine to March 17th, which is a full 14 days from the interaction. I remain strong and healthy and have no symptoms, and based on the medical advice I've received, there's very little reason to be concerned. But given the gravity of this health crisis, it is also wise to be prudent. And when you've encountered people who have tested positive, the best way to prevent the spread of this disease is social distancing and preventing unnecessary potential transmission.
And, Senator, to that point, two of your colleagues, in fact, Senator Ron Johnson and Representative Chris Smith, are also photographed with Santiago. You mentioned that folks should be self-quarantining themselves. Should that also extend to President Trump, who was at the CPAC conference?
Well, look, I leave it to each person in consultation with medical officials and their doctors to make those assessments. I don't know with whom they interacted. On my end, I spent a great deal of time speaking with the CDC, speaking with HHS, speaking with the Harris County and the City of Houston health officials. All of them told me the risks of transmission were quite low because my interaction with the CPAC individual was very limited, and 9 days have passed. In this instance, with the Spanish official, the interaction was longer, but it's been a full 10 days, and I remain without symptoms. I just think it is more prudent to not put anyone else potentially at risk.
And speaking of prudence, though, the president insists he doesn't need to be tested. Should he be?
Well, I can tell you what the physicians have told me, which is that if you're asymptomatic, if you're not sick, they've said the tests are not effective, that you don't have a sufficient viral load to work. And so they've advised me testing doesn't do any good unless you're already sick.
Have you been tested,
so
sir?
that, pardon?
Have you been tested?
I have not, because the physicians all advised me not to get tested unless I got sick. They said if you get sick, then you should get tested, but the test is medically ineffective if you're not sick. Now, I do think there are a great many public policy steps we need to take to prevent this outbreak, and I think testing is an important piece of it. We need to do a much better job getting tests in the field, allowing private labs to move forward. I was gratified to see the Mayo Lab has made progress in developing a rapid test. But we also need to get protective materials like masks and surgical gloves and disinfectants out in much larger numbers, and we need to be focusing on the critical resources for hospitals, things like ventilators, that if this escalates, as we've seen it do in China, as we've seen it do in Italy and Iran, that we need to make sure our hospitals have sufficient equipment to care for people who are seriously ill.
And Senator Cruz, you know, another component of this is the public reaction. We each have a role to play in containing and mitigating the effects of this illness. There's a poll out this morning showing that Republicans are much less concerned than Democrats about contracting the illness. And if they're less concerned, the question is, will they take these precautions seriously? So as a Republican senator, what is your message to Republican voters, Republican citizens, about how seriously they should take this outbreak?
Well, the last I checked, this isn't a Democratic virus or a Republican virus. This is a dangerous virus. This is a serious public health crisis, and we need to take it seriously. Now, at the same time, we shouldn't give in to panic or hysteria. We need to follow the science. We need to listen to the medical professionals and the doctors. The doctors are advising there are a lot of things we can do. For seniors, if you are a senior, particularly if you have serious health conditions, the medical advice is stay home. I can tell you what I've advised both of my parents. My dad is 81, my mom's 85. I've advised both of them, just stay home. I told my mom, you don't need to go out, just stay in your apartment. If you need food, order it online. But just right now, those who are most vulnerable to this virus are seniors with other health issues, and we need to be wise and prudent. We also need to do things like wash our hands regularly. Soap and water is very effective on this virus. Avoid going to large gatherings. I'll say, as a diehard basketball fan, it's been heartbreaking seeing the NBA and March Madness canceled. But I understand why.
It's not a big deal.
If you're a Knicks fan, Senator, it's good news. Is your family self-quarantining, Senator? Quickly.
My family is not, and what we've been doing and what the medical advice has been is simply to keep my distance in the house. And so I'm staying at least 6 feet away. I'm primarily in another room. I've been staying primarily in the office or in my bedroom, but keeping a distance from them, given that I have no symptoms. What the medical professionals have advised is that the risk of transmission is doubly remote, that my interaction was limited, and I'm asymptomatic, and so the risk to them is substantially smaller.
Senator Cruz, thank you so much for joining us from your extended self-quarantine now.